Excellent. Today we are doing a very special book report. It is on Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk by Peter Bernstein. An incredibly great book. I took it on vacation a year ago and read it then, and have been kind of wandering around doing a book report on it as it relates to residential investing. Because it's about risk, super good book. It was very difficult because it tracks a lot of different themes, and it basically carries through the story of risk from thousands of years ago and then into the Renaissance and a lot of the mathematical. Even though the book is not very mathematical, it talks about the different math and how it changed the way that we review risk and the way we look at our world today. So I am going to do what I would consider probably a pretty bad book report, but that's okay because there is a lot of great information. I recommend you read it. I'm going to cover like 3 different topics. First one is going to be rules, and then let's call it benefits or benefit ideas, and then it's biases. So number 1 is kind of the rules. How is the world laid out? How is risk laid out? Just talking about, so these are all like ideas that are brought up in the book. And so I'm just going to kind of run them down, and I couldn't do it without notes. And then talk about sort of best practices, the different ideas that benefit with relating to investing and its relationship to risk. So I'll cover the first one. Risk is the chance of losing money. It is also with math, when we combined risk in the 1400s, when I started combining and talking about games of chance, I started talking about math. Math allows for the theoretical of understanding of frequency of past events. And when we understand that, then it helps us to be able to project into the future. Regression to the mean is very important, as talked about. And basically, there's a mean, so you could say that the average of things over time sort of follow this line. Even though, and especially in real estate, we frequently see this. But as we're up here looking out into the future, it's a pretty good idea that we're likely going to be somewhere on our mean line. So that's a very important factor, and that's discussed by a lot of different core fundamental investment ideas. No event is identical to any other event. So right now we're kind of peaked over in market decline, but it's not anything like the last couple of market declines we've seen before. It's also a 3-dimensional world, which is that there's different events, and because they're not just like this, where 1 bumps 2 and 2 bumps 3, it's that all of these are like this. So when something bumps, it could bump in multiple directions, and everything affects everything else. Everything is connected to everything else. So that's super important as well. Probability. If there is a chance of 1 in 20 of something happening, the probability is 1 in 20. That is the number of possibilities that it could happen, that the event could happen, and the number of possibilities that you're trying for it to happen, or that it takes to happen. Now, odds are a little bit different in that same one. It's 1 to 19, which, what are the odds of something happening? The probability of it happening is 1 in 20, but the odds are 1 that'll happen and 19 that it won't happen. Now, the value of the outcome varies by person. This is super important as well, because if somebody says you have a 25% chance, of losing everything or gaining everything, some people might take that bet because they don't have anything, and so they'll be farther ahead. But other people who are in a good position would say, no, I've got too much to lose. So risk has a lot to do with the positioning of the person in their life and what the odds are, what the chance of something happening is. Let's see. We estimate probability from what has happened after the fact. So we look at all these things that have happened and we look at it from here. Not only do we only maybe see some things and don't see others, but we also are frequently biased, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We're biased by the things we see. Because some things are closer to us, we think that they may be, those things may be more important. But we'll talk about that in the biases. Let's see, objective measurement with as good info as you can find and using the maths and statistics to describe them. So when you're looking at stuff, you try and do objective measurement, probability, odds, and what's the chance of something happening, and then how important is it that it happens? Let's say it could be, for example, it could be a 1 in 20 chance of happening, but let's say it's like cancer. If you do something and there's a 1 in 20 chance of you getting cancer, it may not be worth doing because this could be catastrophic. It can end your life. All kinds of things can happen which are not beneficial for you. But if it's something like you get a flat tire, it might be well worth the 1 in 20 odds of you doing whatever it is. So it's not just what's the chance or the odds of it happening, but it's also what's the outcome. What's the outcome for this, and is the outcome worth it? Or the outcome, it could be catastrophic. That's why we buy life insurance. That's why we buy health insurance. It's because if something happens to us, and it does happen to some people, and if it happens to us, it can be catastrophic to our lives. But for $100 a month, we can avoid that catastrophe. That's where insurance comes in and it is very beneficial for people's lives. Now, let's talk about best practices for a moment. Okay. You take risks based on their own probability. So if the odds are 1 in 20, or if they're 3 in 20, or if they're 10 in 20, what are the risks? And then remember, this could be favorable outcome, or this could be negative outcome. You're looking at it on both sides, but this would be the plus, and this would be the minus. Let's say this one's 10 in 20, and this one's 3 in 20, and this one's 1 in 20. Obviously you'd want this one where the favorable is 1/2. 1/2 the time you're going to get the favorable, and 1 in 20 you're going to get the negative outcome. As opposed to something here, let's say it could be really favorable, you win the jackpot. And a lot of people play the jackpot even though there's 1 in 400 million chance that they're actually going to win the jackpot, but they'll still put that dollar in because they think they're going to win big. And maybe they see the negative as, just $1. So they don't, what's their negative? What's the downside? They're going to lose $1. It's 19.999999, etc. That they're going to lose $1. But they'll still play it for that 1 in 400 million chance that they're going to win big. So you do this when you're taking an investment, and you do it when you're looking at life and looking at choices of life. Is what are your odds of having a positive effect? What are your odds of having a negative effect? And how do those affect each other? So naturally, this causes us also to seek the best price. And let's see, best price for the product, best return, and you could call that value. So what's the return for the value that you're going to get? And the third is the risk. What are the risks that you could have? Yeah. So how much are you going to pay for it? How much value are you going to get? And what are the risks? Risks that you're going to have a bad outcome for it. If you look at those three things, okay, what's your cost, value, risk? That just kind of adds a third element over here to these two. And this is also, what is it catastrophic? Maybe you have a 10 out of 20% chance of it being good and a 1 out of 20, but let's say this 1 out of 20 is cancer. And that, you may not be willing to take those risks. And maybe if you're young, you are. Maybe when you're older, you're not. It totally depends. It could be like getting COVID. Different age groups had different effects. If you were really young, you almost no result. Somebody who was in their 70s or 80s or comorbidities, you had a good chance that it was going to be a big problem. So people should act differently given the situation of how to respond to a situation when the results or the potential risk is much higher. So that's the value of the outcome and then the likelihood that it's going to happen. So really when you're looking at this, it's how bad is it going to be and what's the percentage chance that it's going to happen. Another thing to ask is the die honest? That is the chance of it happening in your favor or is it rigged against you? Is it going to be something where you can come out ahead because of whoever you are, or are the odds rigged against you in the game? That's really important as well, to make sure you go play games where the die is honest and not rigged against you. Let's see, don't map more. It talks a lot about relative to the odds. If you have a 1 in 5 chance of winning, and you're betting $1 each time you bet, you should be getting more than $5 out the other end. Otherwise, you're just breaking even. If you're betting, let's say, $2 here, and your chances are 1 in 5 to make $5, then you're going to lose. This is where the casinos make the money because you're putting in more than $1 here for the odds. They're guaranteed to make money, but you're guaranteed to lose money over time. And if you look at the whole equation of everybody, casinos stay in business, everybody else has fun, loses money, or doesn't have fun and loses money, and a few people win. Make decisions based on objective facts and desirability of results. One of the things I want to add to that is you have to have an understanding, you have to be willing to dig into the facts to see what the facts actually are. If you don't know what the situation, what the math is, what the history is, what the chances are, then you need to get an idea of what that's going to be, or you're just jumping in. It's really like jumping in not knowing how deep the bottom of the pool is. Well, that's great if you just jump in. If you're 10 feet up and you're doing a dive, it could be catastrophic. So, figure out where that is. Go get into the water, see how deep it is, etc. before you do the dive. Let's see. Pathologically risk-averse people make choices based on consequences without regard to profitability, and foolhardy people make choices based on profitability without regard to consequences. The foolhardy person is, I'm going to dive in the water. It doesn't matter what happens. It's all good because I'm going to get some swimming in. And the risk-averse person goes, I'm just not going to get in the water because, anything could happen. And I'm not interested. Let's see, how much credibility can you give to the evidence? That's another thing. Once you've collected the evidence, how actionable is it? I do a lot of stats. I see a lot of stats, and a lot of stuff just is not that important. I mean, there are 24-hour news on just stocks and bonds and stuff like that. I've read several authors. Well, you make money over time. You don't, except for the day traders. Everybody else doesn't need to hear what's going on a daily basis because it doesn't benefit them. It may cause them to buy and sell, but usually at the wrong time. Now, lastly, human biases. Let's go to that real quick. So Daniel Kahneman and I forget his compadre in crime, they wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow. As I understand, it's an incredible book. I have it on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. And it's all about cognitive biases that we have, and especially relating to investing and risk. So I'm just going to give you a few and read them off. Losses make people risk averse. Increases in wealth increases people's appetite for risk. So if recently you've had losses, you may think that they're going to continue, but especially if you've lost a lot, then your risk aversion is substantial. So for example, if you have a pot of money, two guys have a pot of money. This guy has 120,000 and he loses 100,000. And this guy has $1 million and he loses 100,000. This guy is far more risk averse than this guy because he's lost 1/10 of what he had. This guy lost about 80% of what he had. So it's not necessarily the amount, but it's also relative. And if we had a big loss, our next deal, we could see another deal that, let's say, has to do with 100,000, and both of them, let's say, could do the deal, but this guy's much less likely to do the deal than this guy. This guy's going to go forward because, okay, if he has another loss, he can still withstand it. So people who've had losses, that all makes sense to me. Use computational shortcuts. So we think that because something's happened over and over and over again, or because we see kind of similar things happen, we think that it is a certain way. So for example, in residential real estate, the last time that the interest rate was 5% was in February of 2011. Since then, the interest rate for a 30-year loan has been below 5% up until about 6 months ago, the beginning of 2022, in about March of 2022. Now, the people looked at that and just thought that was the normal. Everybody who's been in real estate for the last 10, 15 years is unaccustomed to 5% rates being normal or high. And they've been looked at as high because you had a 3% or 4% or even 2.5% rate. So that 5% was really high, but realistically, since 1972, the average interest rate is about 7.7%. That's overall. That was a high in the 80s of like 18%, and then down into the 2.8% in just a year or two ago. And so seeing those all together, their average is about 7.7%. So 5 is relatively low relative to the average overall, but because everyone's experience over the last 10 years is having a very low interest rate, 5 looks really high. Let's see, they overweight new information and underweight existing information. So you could have a whole body of information and you get some new information, and what we do is we happen to be looking at it from here. And so the way we see it is we see it kind of like this. And we see the new information, that's what's in front of us, and we don't necessarily give credence or weight to the historical information that we may have even experienced. Let's see. People are influenced by past experiences, but more influenced by recent. This is the same kind of thing as recency bias. Fear of losing is greater than the desire for gain. They found that if you lose $10 and 2 days later you gain $10, you're going to remember this. This is going to look like a bigger package in your mind than this will. So the loss aversion is greater than the desire for gain, typically. Conjecture process of estimating the whole from the parts. So basically we have a whole thing. It's a situation, but really what we only have parts of it, but we sort of fill in the rest of it. Now, this is a natural thing that all humans do, but it could be something completely different than what we think it is. But we have a tendency also to fill in with most recently and with our own past experience. We fill in the picture with whatever we think is there, not necessarily what is there, and depending on the parts. Let's see. How we frame things in our minds matters. We pay too little attention to the routine, lots of attention to the low profitability events and the high drama. And that's how TV stars are made. We pay lots of attention to low profitability events and high drama. There's a lot of stuff in the news that means nothing relating to us or our situation or even what could make an investment, but it makes us feel a certain way, and then we act. We could act according to whatever it is that we're feeling based on whatever it is. So if we think it's a bad thing that just happened, that may run over and trickle into our observations on other things. But it's not necessarily, I mean, it could be a low probability event, which it could be a plane crash, which has very low probability events. Some people are terrified of flying, or it could be a high drama. Somebody, I don't know, somebody hitting the gong wrong way in the stock exchange. High drama. Oh, everybody's up in arms. How could they do that? Why would they do that? We see that also in businesses. Somebody does something really stupid, and like Enron exploded. Bad things happened, but everyone uses that a case where, well, that could happen somewhere else. But there's actually very few cases, I think, of that happening. But it's high drama. Let's see. Loss aversion. We reference value based on the possible gain or loss of where we are now. And that has a lot to do with this. So if we only have $20,000, we're going to look at all situations based on where we're at now, not necessarily whether it's a good investment or not. Now, that's also a good thing, because if this is a much bigger thing and the risk is higher, it could wipe out this little person, but it'll have hardly any effect on the person with more capital. Separate parts. Fail to realize the decisions will affect the whole. So, that goes back to the 3D of everything. All these things affect each other. When we do one thing, well, that's the whole stock market. The stock market and the real estate market. It's all the individual players playing in the market at one time, and each one affects every other one. And they affect them in different ways, and you introduce new things in, and it affects everybody else and has an effect differently on the whole. And that's the really fascinating things about markets, is because it's the accumulation of all these effects of all these people, not only what they're doing, but what they're thinking, because they do their doing based on why, and how they're thinking. Losses added to a larger loss is not as painful as a loss on its own. So if somebody loses, let's say, $100, and then they lose $10, well, you're throwing good money after bad. Okay, well, that's not such a big deal. But if they're asked to just lose $10 over here, they say, no, I don't want to lose $10. But, there might be the chance that this other $50 or $100 problem, that they can solve it with 10, even though they're really just throwing good money after bad. They're more willing to do this than they are this, which is spend money on a risky venture and something else. Now, the planner versus the thrill seeker. Some people plan and they overplan and they never get to doing anything. Some people are just in it for the game, and they want to see how much they can do, and they don't care about winning or losing. Well, they care about winning, because that's great, but the losing comes along with it. And they don't mind that. They don't mind being a zero or negative, and they're always just trying to play to get more stuff done. Anyway, it was an excellent book. There's lots of great nuggets and fundamentals in there. Highly recommend it. And that's it for now.